Hey there, friends. This is Dr. Jennifer Bird. I'm a biblical scholar and I care very much about what people do with what they find in the Bible. And I am doing story time today. We're going to read some stories attributed to Jesus in the Gospels. And we're going to do this for a few of the upcoming live streams when it's just me. And I want to talk about the traditional interpretations and in particular some of the more harmful traditional interpretations, and then offer a different rereading of them through political and economic lenses. It's kind of fun. It's very informative. I think it's really helpful for a lot of people. So that's what we'll be doing. And let's do a little countdown and we'll get to it. So, hey there. Sorry I was a little late getting started here today. I was trying to, it doesn't matter. I am late and I'm glad that some of you are able to be here, willing and able to be here, wanting to be here to join me. And I, there is something funny going on with my camera. Like everything seems to be shaking. Is that coming through to you all too? Or is it just me? It's kind of weird. I'm not sure what it's all about. Anyway, today is another example of a day of engaging that I wish we were in person. I wish we could chat about things. So I'm going to do my best to ignore that urge of mine to do that because I love being a teacher. I love engaging with people. And we've got several people in the house who are familiar. We've got Carrie Ann and Nitty and April. It's really nice to see you all. Okay, thank you for that, April. You don't see it, so there's like this little flashing thing that it's going on my end at least. Okay, it seems like that would be really distracting or to watch. It's a little distracting to me, and it's when I move, right? That's when I see it. That's just weird. Okay. I don't know. What is that? Is that the platform I'm using? I'm not sure. Okay. Well, so what I thought I would do is start with a few, relatively easy, some of the easy ones, some of the ones that are really helpful stories to reframe for people. And, you're not noticing it, KAC. Okay. Either. That's interesting. Okay. So the stories that I'm thinking of are predominantly they're in the synoptics, so they're in the three that are similar to each other. They don't show up. I don't think some of them might show up in John, but they tend to be in the synoptics. And so this tells us something about the way that the synoptics are trying to handle the story of Jesus, right? Through a very different lens than John does. John is doing a theological engagement with who Jesus is, and let me do a little something here. Let me do this. Okay. John is doing a theological engagement with Jesus. The synoptics are doing much more of a human person here. What he did that was, ultimately got him killed was to care more about the people and he cared about the overtaxation of the people. And he cared about the fact that there were people in the temple who were exploiting their position of power. And that it's more than just, it's more than just, selling merch in the temple. It's a bigger issue than that. And this is why actually I had James Crossley on to talk a little bit about looking at the economics of the first century in Galilee and Judea, and to see that understanding who the guy Jesus was, whoever he was, but understanding the guy who's depicted makes so much more sense when you look at him and the story and the setting through the lens of economics and through the lens of politics, not through the lens of this concept of an afterlife that we're all trying to get to, and Jesus being the ultimate animal sacrifice to appease God's anger. That doesn't make sense to me anymore the way it used to. And I'm sorry, I was looking at Carrie Ann's comments. I I did, yeah, I was doing something the other day. Oh, digital Hammurabi, and I did whatever emoji it was to 2 peace signs that sent the sent the balloons off. Um, yeah, I just don't understand what it is that's causing like the light on my screen to go. But if it's not coming through to you all, that's great because that's what matters to me. Okay, um, so what I find is helpful then is, okay, so we have a scholar who's suggesting that we read, well, many scholars, but I happen to, you happen to just hear from one recently on this channel, and he was also in Myth Vision. He and Robert Miles, the guy who he co-wrote the Jesus in Class Conflict, they were on Myth Vision last summer, I think, last fall. But anyway, it's one thing to have someone say, oh, well, we really need to understand the economics of the first century, and especially in light of the overhaul of or the building of two significant cities, right? Sepphoris and Caesarea. We need to talk about, or Tiberias, I forget which city that is. Sorry, but anyway, one of the two big port cities, and then one inland. We need to talk about how that really did affect people, and then that's great and all, but then it's helpful then to have, okay, well then how does that change the way I read any of the gospel passages, right? So I thought I'd start with a couple that are it's relatively easy to see it if you're willing to see it. So let's do some of the really good juicy stories, shall we? So for instance, what I'm getting at here is I'm going to look at, so that also means that it tends to be closer to the end of the Gospels, because the first few chapters, in Mark it's the first half, and Matthew and Luke it's maybe a little more than a half, but so it's towards the end, so it's when he's getting closer to Jerusalem or when he's actually in Jerusalem that these stories come out. And so, excuse me, and I think that makes a lot of sense, because if you think of the storyline, you think of the trajectory of this guy, whoever he was, right? This guy, frustrated with overtaxation, frustrated with the people in the temple, their overreach. But what do I mean by that? What I mean is, yeah, if you can't pay your taxes, what are you left with? Well, you're left to hand over the deed to your land to pay what you owe. And so what that means is you have people in the temple in Jerusalem who are kind of becoming landowners of land far removed from them at times, right? So who's managing that? Who's taking care of that? Who's the landowner? Like, who's overseeing what's happening up in Galilee if you live in Jerusalem and you now own that land? But what does that mean? Are you going to try to collect some of the goods off of that land that you think, should now be in your pocket? Do you get a share of what's produced up there? Well, a lot of people seem to think so, right? Right. And so if people who were living up there were not able to pay the tax, so they have to hand over the deed, but now they're being hired to work the land, so that means they get even less of the output. How is this any better? This isn't better. This is worse for them, right? So this is the angle through which I think it is helpful to try to read some of these stories. So I hope that part is clear. Yes, right. The issue of, and so, right, there are tax collectors who are, spread out, who are visiting or living throughout the area. Yes. And this is a thing that changed. So it wasn't, I don't know if you all have heard this before, but the Romans changed the way they collected taxes from the Jews when they kind of put together that, hey, you know what? There are a whole bunch of them that tend to descend upon Jerusalem once a year. Why don't we just ask them to collect the taxes? Because they have this thing going on anyway that would make it easy. And of course, it ends up not being just then because not everybody goes to Jerusalem once a year, etc. So then you have people living throughout the land who are tax collectors. And that's why you have the story of Zacchaeus, which we'll read next time. I don't want to talk about Zacchaeus today, but I think it's a little bit easier to talk about Zacchaeus after we do what we're doing today. So it takes on a different element, at least it did for me. When I first started, of course, nobody likes it. I mean, nobody wants to pay taxes, right? Or most people don't enjoy paying taxes. So, of course, we don't like the tax collector. But when you add on a layer or two of what's going on here, of politics, that the Jews were forced into this position, right? So there's an element that's just not fair. And then many of them took advantage of that position, that power, right, to line their own pockets. And you see this in lots of places. You see at the beginning of Luke when right after Jesus's baptism in the Jordan, that some people come to talk to John to say, what do I need to do for forgiveness? And he's like, well, stop demanding more wages than stop taxing people over more than they're supposed to be taxed. Like, he just says that straight up. It's like, this is an issue. And it's an issue associated with the temple. So you have first century Jews who are able to rely on their tradition, which focused a righteous relationship with God, right, on the way you treat each other. And so you can call that, you can frame that in terms of being, keeping the law accurately, keeping the law, you have the vantage point of saying living morally is a way to live out the covenant, right? So when you're abusing your power, that is breaking covenant relationships. That is, I mean, you have that access. You can say that. And so for people to misunderstand Jesus or John the Baptist, for instance, and just say, he didn't like, I think people misunderstand, I guess, is part of what I'm getting at. And they only see it as a religious thing instead of seeing the connection between the way people live out their lives is religious, right? From a Jewish perspective. So it's not just, do you see what I'm saying? The distinction I'm trying to make here, that the Christian tradition has people in the Christian traditions, and then they're influenced by or interacting with people who are in a Christian tradition, have been given a significantly spiritualized message or way of reading scripture that has been quite detrimental to a lot of people over the centuries. And so we miss the struggle that's going on when we read stories that are actually about economics as if they're about heaven. And that is a big part of what I grew up, having modeled for me, and what so many people I interact with were taught as well. So, some of you didn't have that, or you didn't grow up with any of this, and so you don't really understand perhaps what I'm getting at, but it'll make more sense once we look at a couple of the examples, okay? So let's look at the end of Luke chapter 19. So, Jesus sets his mind to Jerusalem somewhere back in chapter 14 or 16 of Luke, So here we have the cleansing of the temple. This is one of those moments I really wish we were in person so I could ask you all. Oh, there's a new person here I'm not familiar with. Maybe you've been here and I just didn't see you. So the traditional understanding of what's going on when Jesus clears the temple, when he's in Jerusalem. I would love it if you could just drop a couple of your thoughts about that in the chat. What is the problem? Why is Jesus so angry when he enters Jerusalem and I'll read it and then you can be putting it in the chat. So starting in verse 45 of Luke chapter 19, then he entered the temple and began to drive out those who were selling things there. Why is this a problem, right? And he said, it is written, my house shall be a house of prayer, quote, but you have made it a den of robbers. Why is this a problem? Right? What is he doing that's a what's happening there that's a problem? Well, I've heard things like they were charging too much for the animals that people would then use as their sacrifice for, for the sin offerings and the various offerings that they were being charged. The prices they were being charged were too much. I think there's a good reason to expect that because that's what happens. That's what people do, right? It's like, oh, you need access to this. Like you go to an amusement park. I'm not trying to compare the temple and amusement parks, but in a sense, like you need these things so we can charge whatever we need to, right? Sure, that's probably part of it, right? Is that all that makes Jesus angry, though? Is that the thing that makes him so livid? I don't think so, right? And what I think is really helpful about this passage is to pay closer attention to what he says, not just that he overturns the money changers' tables, right? Because they're not giving a fair exchange rate. Perhaps that's quite reasonable to expect, unfortunately, right? For all the same reasons. But look at what he quotes. He quotes, "My house shall be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers." Now, what happens in a den of robbers? It's not where you do the robbing, right? This isn't the place where people are being robbed, even if it is the case in these outer courts or whatever. That's not the point here. The point is that this is where the robbers are storing their loot. This is where they're conspiring. This is where they're safe. This is a den of robbers is where you retreat to after you've done the looting, right? It's where your loot is stored. So from my perspective, this just dramatically changed things for me when when I finally saw that. I was like, oh, this isn't just about the exchange rate at the door. This is about the whole temple, the people running the temple, what's happening there. This isn't about a couple, being charged too much for 2 turtle doves. No, this is much bigger than that. And that squares with what we know about first century Palestine. Is that issue is widespread, that the masses, if you will, the people, most of the people, the peasants, whatever, yeah, they're being fleeced. And the people here in the temple are the ones running the scheme, running the thing, right? So he says this, right? My house, he's quoting from scripture, "My house should be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers." And the narrative continues on. Every day, Jesus was teaching in the temple. The chief priests, the scribes, and the leaders of the people kept looking for a way to kill him. But they did not find anything they could do, for all the people were spellbound by what they heard. You don't try to kill someone over rejecting the interest rates, the exchange rates. You're not that angry over that. You're angry because he's right about the injustice that is happening, that is centered here on the temple and emanates outward through the tax collectors, through the various ways that they're imposing and sustaining unjust practices, right? Let's see. Is there anything in the okay. So I'm going to keep going then. In chapter 20. Well, there's a passage that's I'll read it, but it's not as central to what I'm trying to do here, but we'll just read it. Chapter 20. One day, as he was teaching the people in the temple and telling the good news, which would be economic, right? He's not telling good news about his death. He's telling good news about freedom from economic oppression and injustice, right? In unjust practices in the temple. And yet he's standing in the temple teaching about it. So it's kind of an interesting way to poke the beehive, right? Poke the bear, whatever. So he's in the temple telling the good news. The chief priests and the scribes came with the elders and said to him, "Tell us, by what authority are you doing these things? Who is it who gave you this authority to speak, to teach, to do these things in the temple?" Right? He answered them, "I will also ask you a question, and you tell me. Did the baptism of John come from heaven, or was it of human origin? You know, that is important to understand, I think, again, through the economic lens of what an small group of people, an extremist out in the desert is going to be talking about. He's talking about a forgiveness of sins that is separate from the temple because the temple is corrupt, right? So he's got this thing going on. Did the baptism of John come from heaven or was it of human origin? Well, the baptism of John is human origin because humans were fucking with things in the temple, so it needed to happen. I mean, that's how John explains it and understands it. Is it from heaven? Well, yes, because it's in keeping with covenant relations. So it's if you think of it only through this spiritual lens, you're going to miss the whole point here, right? They discussed it with one another, saying, if we say from heaven, right, he will say, why did you not believe him? But if we say of human origin, all the people will stone us, for they're convinced that John was a prophet, and rightly so. Right? So they answered that they did not know where it came from. And Jesus said to them, neither will I tell you by what authority I'm doing these things. It's just really kind of funny. Okay. That helps. That's still in keeping with what I'm trying to get at, but that isn't a passage that I hear people often misunderstand. In case you're wondering, Minerva is in the house today and she's on my lap. And so that's why things are a little bit awkward over here. If you happen to notice. So the next story, I actually tried to put together, that's why I was running late, to be honest. I was trying to put together a slideshow to help highlight what's going on here. So what I'm going to do, is read through the story, which you may be familiar with, might not be. I'm going to read through the story and then I'll go back through it, talking about how it has been interpreted. There's more than just two ways, right? More than what I have on the slideshow. But the two are just to explain or to show you typical or traditional interpretations versus how I think we should be understanding this story. So this is Luke chapter 20, verses 9 to 19. Okay. So I'll just read the story. Story time. By the way, did you all see that someone made an icon of me? It's super fun. And I'm thinking about turning it into a poster to sell. I don't know. Would anyone even want that? Did you all see this? What's the best way for me to share that? Let me do that real quick because that's kind of fun. I think I'll do Instagram link. Is it gonna show here? I think it will. Hang on. Yep. Okay. Well, you can see it in my it's my Instagram image right now. And you can see it in there. It's pretty fun. So anyway, I'll let you guys can find that and kind of do a short with a poll comment. Maybe I should do that. Yeah. But I think I will, because I also have another image that I took from, I did a photo shoot right before Permission Granted came out. And it was with two friends. It was so fun. I had just performed the wedding for these two women, and they were so in love. They were having so much fun being married, and one is a photographer, the other's a poet. They're just beautiful people. And so they did a photo shoot with me. She was new. The photographer was new at doing photography. So it was like, I gave him a bottle of Maker's Mark or something, as my payment for it. But she took some really cool images. And one is one that I paid officially for, like separate, like an official $150 or whatever for her work that I think I might turn into a poster. So now I have two that would work as posters. I don't know. I'm trying to embrace this, right? So I think, look for that in the near future if you're interested. Okay, so not sure what made me think to mention that. Anyway, trying to think what comment made me think about that. Selling my image. It's kind of funny. Okay, so here we are. We're in Luke chapter 20, verses 9 to 19. Okay. So Jesus began to tell people this parable. A man planted a vineyard and leased it to tenants and went to another country for a long time. When the season came, he sent a slave to the tenants in order that they might give him his share of the produce of the vineyard. But the tenants beat him and sent him away empty-handed. Next, he sent another slave. That one they also beat and insulted, which is a reference to raping, and sent away empty-handed. And he sent still a third. This one also they wounded and threw out. Then the owner of the vineyard said, "What shall I do? I will send my beloved son. Perhaps they will respect him." Which is ridiculous if you think about it. But anyway, but when the tenants saw him, they discussed it among themselves and said, "This is the heir. Let us kill him so that the inheritance may be ours." So they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. What then will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and destroy those tenants and give the vineyard to others. When they, meaning the people in the temple, heard this, they said, "Heaven forbid! No!" But he looked at them and said, "What then does this text mean? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Everyone who falls on that stone will be broken to pieces, and it will crush anyone on whom it falls." When the scribes and chief priests realized he had told this parable against them, they wanted to lay hands on him at that very hour, but they feared the people. Okay, so I have, let's see if it works. Sweet girl, la la la. I don't have it. Let's see. Oh, let's see. I think. Hang on a second here. Right. There we go. All right. No, that's weird. Oh, let's see. Huh. Is that really what's going on? Why that's an issue? It is not showing. That's weird. I don't know why it's not showing up. Huh. Let's see. Oh, I needed to put it in a thing. Okay, that's why. Okay, my apologies. I didn't realize all that. Okay, I'll have that done better next time. Okay, so I have a table. Let me describe it to you. I have a table, very simple table that has, okay, the traditional handling of this parable, and then what I think is a more like economically and politically informed handling of this metaphor. And so let's walk through the story again slowly. So we have, okay, a man planted a vineyard and leased it to tenants. So in the metaphor, who is the man? What's the vineyard? Who are the tenants? And who are the people that he sends to collect? Who's his son? All the stuff, right? And Christians have been taught to interpret this as a metaphor for God and the covenant, God and the people, God's people, the covenant, so that you, it gets really intense. You look at this through the lens of covenant language. The man is God, and the vineyard then is the covenant. And then leased it to tenants would be the Israelites, who then become the Jews, right? And then this person went to another country for a long time. When the season came, he sent a slave to the tenants in order that they might give him his share of the produce of the vineyard. So then that has been interpreted as he sends the prophets to make sure that the people are giving God the worship he deserves, the worship he's supposed to have from them. But the tenants beat him and sent him away empty-handed, which is an accurate way of interpreting what happened, which is that the people didn't want to hear it from the prophets, and so they would send him away, often, whatever. And sometimes they were killed, right? And that's what happens next. He sends some more, and what do? They kill him, right? Or this one they're still just wounding them and defiling them. The owner says, "What shall I do? I'll send my son." So then this is where we come in with Jesus is being sent right next to try to get the message through. And what do? The people kill him, which is an interesting thing, right? Because then if you're interpreting it this way, then you're suggesting that Jesus is predicting that his own death for this purpose or whatever. But that's how people have been taught to read it. And part of the issue here, right? This is the heir. Let us kill him so that the inheritance may be ours. So they threw him out and killed him. And so this idea that the people didn't receive Jesus, right? They killed him. And then what will the owner of the vineyard do to them? What is God, the owner of the covenant, going to do to the Jews who have killed Jesus? This is where it gets creepy as bleep. He will come and destroy those tenants and give the vineyard to others. And this has been consistently interpreted this way, that the Jews were responsible for denying Jesus, for not accepting Jesus as the Messiah. And so God is allowing the Jews to be destroyed, however you want to look at that, and is giving the covenant now to Christians. If you think I'm being dramatic, I'm not. I'm not being overly dramatic here. This is how the Christian tradition, this is how the Newer Testament texts actually, other than this, later on, do speak this way. They do say that this covenant has been shifted and the old part is no longer. If you look in the book of Hebrews, that is a very clear way of understanding what's going on. But that later idea is being read onto this. It's terrifying when you look at this little chart that I have comparing the traditional handling of it and the claim that God would do this, right, with his own people, regardless of who they are, but specifically with Jews in light of 20th century horrificness. But but a more economically and politically informed first century interpretation of this would go more like this. Who's the man with the vineyard and who are the tenants? The man is a man associated with the temple who has recently gotten a hold of a deed to land that he didn't previously have, right? He has land now that he didn't have. And he's going to plant a vineyard, which is interesting in and of itself because a vineyard, grapes are a luxury item. Those are not like sustenance items, right? If you'd had barley or whatever previously and you couldn't make the rent, right, and pay the taxes, now you have to work what used to be your own land in some cases, but you're being forced to work a luxury item. Okay. Also, and you're supposed to produce more. Well, I suppose there's an element there of that, but this issue of being forced to work your own land for someone else now it's incredibly humiliating and also just incredibly unfair, right? So when the season came, he sent a slave to the tenants to get his share. We're not talking metaphor here. We're talking about an actual story that took place. These kinds of things went down. Jesus isn't making this up, and he's not telling a metaphor. He's talking about what has gone down. The tenants would beat the people coming to collect the share for the guy back in Jerusalem. I'm not justifying the violence. I'm saying this is somewhat understandable. Not okay. Richard Horsley, I don't know if any of you all are familiar. I know that a lot of you really like having some intelligent biblical scholarship to read. There's a guy, Richard Horsley, Horsley, has written quite a few books trying to show people the role of empire and the role of economics in all of this. And the cycle of violence, I think that's one of them. You know, just this kind of a thing. When poor people are placed in such horrific situations, you can't help but I mean, you're not being you're not paying attention if you expect them not to revolt. And unfortunately, that is when people take up violent means to try to be heard and understood. I'm not intended trying to justify violence. I'm trying to talk about understanding why it's happening. And that's what Horsley is doing in that particular book, but he has quite a few out there if you're interested in some new reading material. So when the tenants saw, they discussed among themselves and said, "This is the heir." When he sends the son, it's his actual son. It's not Jesus, God sending Jesus. It's his actual son. "Let us kill him so that the inheritance may be ours." So this isn't necessarily how it worked, but what the thinking there is showing us, or what the story is showing us, is that this used to be our land, and if we kill the the one who's to inherit it, then maybe it'll come back to us, which isn't the way it worked. But that's what this story is showing. So they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. What then will the owner of the vineyard do to them? Well, he's going to come destroy them and just give it to new people who are willing to work the land. And when you see in this story, when they heard this, they said, "Heaven forbid." I mean, I think it's important for us to consider that the people he's talking to in the temple have either had it happen to them or to their relatives, their neighbors, their friends. They know people. They know people who were, ended overnight. And right? They know how this happens. They've seen it happen. The people are thrown out and replaced with there are plenty of people waiting to try to have some work or whatever, right? So when he says he looked at them and they're screaming, "Heaven forbid." This is, he's not saying any of this is fair or just. He's calling out what went down. He's calling out this treatment of people. And I think this passage, this next line is kind of hard to understand, but he looked at them and said, "What then does this text mean? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone." I think it depends on how you want to understand. Like, you can understand this in several different ways, but it's interesting to me that he says this in the temple. The people who are building buildings, and the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Are we talking about, or is it keystone? So is it the foundation or is it the point? Regardless, I think he's talking about a form of righteousness. He's talking about covenant behavior. He's talking about righteousness, because that's what Jews do. Like, that's how they frame the conversation, the way you live your life. And so is this a just foundation, right? Or is this something else? And, to talk about whoever falls on that stone will be broken to pieces and it will crush anyone on whom it falls. It's kind of an interesting way of getting at righteousness, or is he trying to say anyone who messes with, is he saying the stone that the builders rejected, which was a faulty one, and that originally those who built up this tradition that is now called Judaism, they meant it to be built on justice, and they rejected unjust behaviors, but now that they rejected is actually the way things are going, and then this stone of exploitation and injustice and all of that is going to crush anyone who gets in its way. I mean, I think that's how we're supposed to understand it. I imagine there were sayings and other things going on at the time that people didn't need to have this translation made for them standing there in the temple, because then the wrap up is just as telling, right? It says, "When the scribes and chief priests realized that he had told this parable against them, they wanted to lay hands on him, but they feared the people." This is economic, right? This is about justice, which is lived out. That is how you live the covenant relationship, is by living justly and righteously and by not exploiting your neighbor. Let's see. So I'm gonna do one more, just the next 7 verses, which is starting verse 20 to 26. It is also highly misunderstood, I think. Several of these are. So let's just do this one, and then we'll call it a day for today. We'll just see how this goes. So picking up right where I left off, they wanted to lay hands on him, but the people, the scribes and the chief priests, feared the people. So they watched him and sent spies who pretended to be honest. Think about this for a minute. The people in this temple sent spies to watch Jesus that week while he's in Jerusalem, right? And while he's speaking and teaching in the temple. Sent spies who pretended to be honest in order to trap him by what he said, so as to hand him over to the jurisdiction and authority of the governor. Well, what's going on there? That's telling us something about political stability and the potential for instability, right? You have Jews who are descending upon Jerusalem for this festival, this important holiday called Passover, which, by the way, is a celebration of deliverance from oppression, which I never really saw it that way in high school, college, even in undergrad, even in graduate school. It took a while before I saw the meaning of Passover through an economic lens, right? But that's what's going on here, is people keeps, the uprisings that are put down by the Roman authorities. 2,000 Jews are crucified prior to Jesus's life because they're trying to stir up an uprising against the people ruling over them. And they stir it up at a time when there are a lot of people descending upon Jerusalem for a holy holiday, right? So, and this is the festival that celebrates deliverance from oppression. So it's no surprise. It's not just a coincidence that that's the festival that Jesus chooses to go to, right? And that people are, right, and that's why people would wait outside of the town. They hear that this guy Jesus, who's trying to speak for the people, is taking it to the man. He's heading down for Passover. Makes sense that would be a time when some people might expect an uprising, right? So you have more Roman soldiers in town to try to keep the peace, which is to keep things from getting out of hand, right? So they're watching him to see if they can hand him over to the governor, right? Is he speaking seditiously? Is he speaking against the authority of the people in the temple, who are these mediators between the Jews and the Romans? So they asked him, these spies, "Teacher, we know that you are right in what you say and teach. You show deference to no one, but teach the way of God in accordance with truth. Is it lawful for us to pay taxes to the emperor or not?" Which is really fun and fascinating, because that isn't the issue, right? When you are intentionally misframing the issue, you're going to get the answer. You're not actually going to get at the issue that Jesus is frustrated by, right? Is it lawful to pay taxes or not? Well, that's not the problem. The problem isn't the paying taxes, it's how much we're being asked to pay. So he perceived their craftiness and said to them, "Show me a denarius. Whose head and whose title does it bear?" They said, "The emperor's." He said to them, "Then give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's." And they were not able, in the presence of the people, to trap him by what he said. And being amazed by his answer, they became silent. Um, surely in that moment, the people listening are well aware that a Jew is going to think in light of the things that are God's are righteousness. The things that are God's are keeping the covenant and living accordingly and treating each other well. That's how you live out the covenant, is by a righteous, moral way of life. So that he's not denouncing paying taxes to the emperor. He's denouncing the way they're being taxed. He's denouncing the overtaxation, which falls under the God's realm, right? Not the issue of paying taxes themselves. So it's actually rather clever. Obviously, it's a clever response. But I don't see people preaching on it that way. I don't hear people teaching and preaching on it that way. I hear them making it a thing about Christianity instead of seeing it in the Jewish and Roman political context, right? Okay. So that's it. That's it for today. The story time. We'll see how this goes. There are a handful of really important and popular stories that can be reframed this way that I think it's helpful to do. So I'll be doing that in the next couple weeks. Next week we have a woman named Ruth Naomi Norton, Dr. Ruth Naomi Norton, who will be on the show. I'm very excited to have her on. Let's see. I'm going to show her Facebook page. Oh, Naomi Ruth. Sorry. Yeah, sorry. Naomi Ruth Norton. I want to show you her page, her Facebook page, because so you can see if you want to go check her out. But you can see her intro here. Let's zoom in. She has a PhD. She's a family therapist, and she's been doing some work on white fundamentalist evangelicalism. She has a diagram that she works with in talking about the overlap of power and religious belief and behaviors, and in particular within a white evangelical fundamentalist framework, which is what she grew up in, but then also looking at the many ways that this sets the scene for abuse for people. So as a family therapist, she's trying to help people see this and unpack it for themselves and not perpetuate it. But she also has some very powerful images. I'm not sure what the sharing settings will allow me to do here. Let me see if I can pull up one of these images just to kind of show you. Oh, it's going to go into a PDF. Well, that's probably good. Okay, that should be shareable then. Let's see. Nope, it's still not going to do that. Okay, my apologies. Okay, well, I wonder if I can save it somehow. Anyway, so she has this, she has a really great wheel of power that she's publishing soon. Anyway, so she comes at it through social work angle. I think it'll be really fun to talk to her, to hear about her own life and what got her to the point of wanting to do this work. Also share some resources that either she's created or she knows of for any of you who are interested and might want similar resources. I just think it's encouraging to know about people doing that kind of work. So I'm excited to have her on the live stream on Storytime next week. And so that's what you can look forward to next. And I am grateful for your presence here, for joining us. And I appreciate people who are watching this later. So don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell, right? Like like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Thanks so much, and I will see you all next week.